Yemen's Houthi rebels have entered the Middle East war for the first time since February the 28th. It happened this weekend. They, of course, are the Iran-backed militia that has seized the Yemeni capital Sana'a. The Houthis firing missiles at Israel this weekend. They've already, of course, mounted similar attacks in support of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But what does their entrance into the war at this point mean? How could it affect transit of oil from the region? The Houthis could make it very dangerous for ships entering the Red Sea zone. Monty Francis with this.
Sirens blared in Tel Aviv, warning of incoming missiles from Iran. Now, missiles are also being launched from Yemen by the Houthis, a militant group backed by Tehran, which announced over the weekend it would continue its attacks until the aggression on all fronts ended.
The Houthi armed forces, with God's help and reliance upon him, have carried out their first military operation. This operation involved a salvo of ballistic missiles targeting sensitive military objectives of the Israeli enemy in the south of occupied Palestine.
So far, Israel's air defenses have prevented the Houthis from doing major damage, but the greater threat, say analysts, could come on the global stage.
The Houthis pose a very serious military threat. They have very sophisticated ballistic missiles. They have very sophisticated drones. They're able to disrupt the shipping routes in the Red Sea, in Bab el-Mandeb.
The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or the Gate of Tears, was named for how perilous it can be to navigate and is vulnerable to Houthi drones and missiles and attacks from small boats. Just south of Yemen, the critical shipping lane connects the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. With shipping already mostly blocked by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, experts say a blockade in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait would effectively shut off traffic through the Suez Canal, which could drive up shipping costs, cause oil prices to surge even more, and ultimately threaten the global economy.
With the Houthis controlling and potentially preventing oil from moving in the Red Sea, we are at a point where we have not been before.
It would not be the first time the Houthis have disrupted global shipping. In 2024, during the war in Gaza, the group attacked dozens of vessels in the Red Sea, forcing ships to take longer routes, effectively soaking up almost 10% of the world's shipping capacity.
Let's bring in Elisabeth Kendall, Middle East expert at Cambridge University, for more on this situation. Elisabeth, thank you very much for being with us here in France 4. We always appreciate your time. How significant do you think is this move by the Houthi rebels at this stage?
I think it's very significant at this particular stage because the Houthis have exercised strategic patience until this point in time. And the reason they've carried out these attacks on Israel now is to send a message that Iran is not the one dictating the terms, that they're not in a mood for a deal on the timetable that America has, and that escalation is still possible. Remember, this comes as US troops arrive in the region and as pressure builds up on Iran. So this is a signal to say we could still escalate and we could really choke off the global economy, because if the Houthis turn their guns towards the Bab el-Mandeb instead of towards Israel, then there's a whole new layer of the conflict.
There's never been any doubt, has there, about who the Houthis support. Clearly, their loyalties are well known, well publicised, very, very clear. But of course, this decision now to do what it's doing, is this a sign that the Houthis will act independently of what Iran says? Do they run to their own agenda? Is that what the message we're getting?
No, I think the message we're getting is that the Houthis are very much aligned with Iran, and that they've been keeping their powder dry until the moment when Iran perhaps needs them most. Because if there's a dual attempt to place a chokehold on trade and oil exports by the Houthis on one side of the Arabian Peninsula and the Iranians on the other, then that puts massive pressure on America and its international allies.
Do we see then, as a natural extension of this, the escalation that you're talking about, that Saudi Arabia could be dragged into a direct conflict with the Houthis?
That's always a possibility, but I don't consider that likely. And that's because Saudi Arabia has already experienced over 1,000 Houthi drones and missiles directed at it during the many years of the internationalized Yemeni civil war. And the last thing it wants is to have the Houthis turn on it again, particularly when it's focused on Vision 2030 and when it wants to protect its oil exports via the Red Sea port of Yanbu. And it's probably worried about its own energy infrastructure and desalination plants. So I imagine that Saudi won't step into the fray.
Nonetheless, as I think you've just intimated, the traffic that perhaps might be seeing the Red Sea as a possibly good route, given what is happening in the Persian Gulf, they might see the Red Sea as a good route for getting essential goods to and from, an essential passageway. That could be under threat now, even more.
That's correct. With Hormuz practically impassable to all but a few ships, the Red Sea is now a vital export route. And in fact, we've seen exports of crude through the Red Sea port of Yanbu quadruple from last year to now. And I think that that's really important because very large crude carriers are now taking around about 6 times as much crude out as they had been from this route. Now, the thing about these very large carriers is that they can't get through the Suez Canal, so they have to exit through the el-Mandeb. That means that if the Houthis choke off that vital exit point, it will have a dramatic impact on the oil supply and therefore spike the oil price and have knock-on effects for the global economy. It means that the Houthis hold serious cards here.
They hold cards, but how well equipped are they? I'm wondering, this is a group that is funded, financed and provided for by Iran. Iran at present is, if we believe Donald Trump, on its knees, but it's on its knees and still fighting back. How well armed, how well prepared are the Houthis?
There's no doubt that the Houthis have been severely degraded over the past couple of years by airstrikes, by Israel, by the UK, and not least by the United States, who fought the Houthis for 7 weeks last year. Nonetheless, they are still standing and they're feeling confident. They have missiles that have 2,000 kilometers of range. They have drones, they have experience, they have drone boats, and they have anti-ship missiles. And even though their most sophisticated weaponry has probably not been replenished by Iran over recent months, nonetheless, they're able to domestically produce. And even if their own weaponry is not as sophisticated as it used to be, that doesn't matter because this is an asymmetric war. All they need to do is to continue and to harass shipping. And that achieves the result that they're seeking.
So this asymmetry you're talking about, we're talking about strikes on shipping or strikes on shipping lanes, disrupting that. We're talking about more strikes against Israel and perhaps strikes on American targets within the region?
I think all of those are possible. But where I imagine that the Houthis would focus, if pressured to that point, I imagine it would be on shipping, because they know that that works. They know that it gets attention because it ultimately impacts the wallets of voters in the West.
Elisabeth Kendall, thank you so much for giving us that insight into the situation. Middle East specialist at Cambridge University. Thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your thoughts so openly with us here on France 24. We always appreciate it. Thanks again to Elisabeth Kendall for joining us.